Propulsion continues to be nominal.
Our EDT chamber pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger, roll with planet.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango down to nominal.
Flight is now try SCE off. Say again, SCE off. Off.
Yikes. You bet. Okay. We don't need any more of these.
Well, good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are watching from around the world. Welcome to a very special edition of NASA Spaceflight Live with the one and only Wayne Hale, a former flight director, former space shuttle program manager, all-around person in the space program and the space industry for the last several years. Very wonderful for you to join us, Wayne. Thank you so much for taking some time.
Thank you for asking me. I've been looking forward to this. It's good to be here with you.
Wonderful. And joining us for the conversation, I don't think we could have a conversation with you without the other shuttle man in our ranks, the one and only Philip Sloss. Philip, how's it going today?
Good. Looking forward to it.
All righty. Well, as always, this is a live interactive show. So we are here to talk to Wayne about all of his experiences with NASA and spaceflight, up to and including what you do now, which is a lot of consulting work, right, Wayne?
Right. Yes. And working in an unpaid manner for the NASA administrator still as an advisor. So we can talk about that as well.
Very well indeed, and I think we shall. So if you have any questions for us or for Wayne, go ahead and tag us at NASA Spaceflight in chat. That puts it into a little queue that makes it a lot easier for us to see and pull some questions. But before we jump into some questions here, just wanted to really quick recognize one of our members, Ron Smith. Thank you a lot. Ron was really excited about this today, Wayne, and 3 hours before we went live was waiting in the chat to send a nice message about how he grew up following the shuttle program, and it was a huge inspiration in his life, and wanted to say thanks to us and the team for all the hard work and everything, and how happy he was to be able to listen to you today. So just wanted to give Ron a quick shout out there before we get going. But yeah, Wayne, for those who are for those who are unfamiliar with the breadth of your background, can you sort of what did you do for NASA for all of those years?
Almost everything but sweep out the floor. I may have even done that from time to time. So my career at NASA started right after I left graduate school, college, came to work at the Johnson Space Center in an organization called Flight Control in those days. The people that work in mission control staff up all those shifts in the control center. I was brought into that. You know, NASA's got many parts. We've got the engineers, we've got the safety and mission assurance people, we've got crew systems people, flight docs, you name it. But I was hired into the mission control organization and spent the first 10 years of my career working on early shuttle flights as a propulsion system engineer, which is to say the attitude control rockets, the RCS reaction control system, and the orbital maneuvering system, slightly larger rocket engines that were used on orbit by the shuttle. We had a very interesting time. I've got stories, my goodness, we can talk about that. So I did that for 10 years, then was selected to be a flight director. And the flight director, of course, is the boss on shift. You can see a nice picture there of one of the flight control teams. My flight control team, oh gosh, was that STS-108? I can't quite see the patch, but
I think it's STS-113, I think.
113, yes, it is. I can see it now. And all the people that worked on my single shift in mission control, we'd have about four different flight control teams working on any particular mission, and rotate those around, obviously, through 135 missions. So I did that for 15 years, and really enjoyed. I think if I look back on my career, being a flight director was the best job I ever had. You're at the center of the action. You get to make some interesting decisions. You have a great team of folks to work with, and the agency just says, "Go make this space flight successful," and that's what we do. And after about 15 years, I was the deputy chief of the flight director office in those days. I was asked to go to the Kennedy Space Center to be what they call launch integration manager, which is to say the senior space shuttle program representative in Florida, to make sure all the launch and landing operations are going well. And of course, just as I got there, the Columbia accident happened, and it changed the whole trajectory of everybody's career. I was going to do that as a temporary assignment for a year, and I didn't even finish a year, and I never got to launch a shuttle from Florida. They called me back to Houston to be the deputy program manager under Bill Parsons. The entire shuttle program management team was changed out, and we had the interesting job over the next couple of years of trying to return the shuttle to flight, which we did on STS-114. And shortly after that, if you remember this little storm they had in the South called Hurricane Katrina, Bill Parsons was asked to go head up the recovery of the NASA people in that area, and they couldn't find anybody else, so they put me in charge of the space shuttle program, which I did for another about 3 years, 2.5, 3 years, and then they asked me to come to NASA headquarters, and that's there's a whole story there. But let me tell you, NASA headquarters is nothing like being a flight director. And so I did that for about 2.5 years, and then I took my retirement from the government. I was working for Bill Gerstenmaier in space operations at the time, and I had some interesting things. We actually set up the commercial crew program while I was there. And it was a very interesting time working in the nation's capital, trying to get the resources for the programs. And then for the last 10 years, I have been working for a small consulting firm, Special Aerospace Services, out of Boulder, Colorado. And it's really allowed me to see behind the curtain in a number of different operations. The first 30 some odd years of my career with NASA was shuttle, a little bit of station shuttle, little bit of other things. And now I get to work with a number of different people on all kinds of different projects. And it's really a lot of fun. It's really a lot of fun. A few years ago, the NASA administrator asked me to be on the advisory panel, which is a volunteer kind of a job. So we get together 3 or 4 times a year, and kind of an eclectic group of folks. Steve Squires, if you know Steve Squires, Mars rover guy, was the head of it when I joined, and I learned a lot from him. And we try to, he's since gone on. Our current lead is Les Lyles, former Air Force 4-star general, but we try to give the administrator and the senior people at NASA the very best advice that we can. And it's a lot of fun too. So I'm keeping busy, and of course in quasi-retirement I have other activities that I'm involved in, not the least of which are my grandkids, and I have pictures if you really want to see. So that's a thumbnail, I guess, of my career.
Indeed. So, I think for a lot of us who joined at different times, following the program and then reporting on it too, I think Philip and I started to intersect and hear your name at very different times in the program. I was definitely, the post-Columbia era and return to flight. And I know Philip was a bit before that for me. But, one thing that I think was very interesting, given where we're all headed. But yeah, Philip, when was your sort of introduction to the shuttle programs? And I'm working this backward to a question that we've got coming up. But Philip, when was your sort of introduction in a professional manner to it?
Oh, in a professional manner?
Well, both, I guess. Let's go with both. Yeah.
Well, I was lucky enough as a kid. My dad worked kind of there was a large industry here in Southern California, aerospace industry, and it's sort of rebuilding itself now. But he worked for a company that made springs, and so a lot of those went into, aircraft and spacecraft. And so we got to go out to Palmdale and see Columbia in its sort of half completed state before it was shipped to Florida ahead of STS-1. So it goes back. I was not quite 10 years old at the time, and I vaguely remember the ALT tests that were done at Edwards. But at that point, then as I grew up, I seem to recall seeing Wayne's name in a few Aviation Week and Space Technology articles over the years. I see one of them obviously from STS-49. I remember that was an improvised satellite rescue.
Oh, yes,
very, very interesting.
Improvised,
yes.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's, and then, yeah, we of course noticed during many ascents and entries, who was sitting in the flight director's chair, and then also, weather flight sitting next to the left of the flight director. And I think Wayne served in both of those seats and others in the flight control room several times.
And this was all sort of getting to the question from Joshua, who was specifically wondering for you, Wayne, when was it early in the shuttle program that you joined NASA as the propulsion in the propulsion system?
So yeah, that I came right out of college, so I graduated with my graduate degree in 1978. And was recruited into NASA getting ready for the first shuttle flight. And I'll never forget the recruiting pitch they gave me. They said, you're coming in at just the right time because the shuttle is going to fly in March of 1979. So if you come, in June of 78, that'll give you almost a year to get ready. And of course, it was 3 years before we actually flew. Maybe there's a little history lesson for people that are anxious about the current rocket. How long does it really take? So I came in 78, right? Apollo had ended, the ASTP, I got to see a little bit of the Apollo-Soyuz test project while I was in school in Houston. And then there was this hiatus for 6 years, right? After Skylab was over, after ASTP. And so they hired a bunch of us new kids. We were all young and excited and energetic and didn't know what we were doing. And the Apollo veterans that were still there kind of looked at us like, oh my, we've got to train these kids the right way. So it was a very interesting time. And I'm glad we did have the almost 3 years to get ready for the first shuttle flight, because it turned out to be more complicated than anybody really thought.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I've always kind of tried to describe it to people like of what does it take to get the shuttle, to get SLS, these large complex vehicles off the ground. It's sort of like trying to get every blade of grass on the planet to align to the exact same point. And if one is slightly off, you're done. You can't go, right?
Well, I hope it's not that bad, but yeah, I think you've got the general direction. There are a lot of things. These are very complicated vehicles that operate at extreme conditions, and you don't want anything to go wrong. Okay.
And sort of talking about that, we see some of the difficulties that they're having with first time operations with SLS, which I don't think, in all honesty, a lot of people are surprised to see issues still popping up and going. But I kind of wanted to go back since because you were part of the program during the 90s, the year of the hydrogen leaks for the shuttles. And because I think and definitely a question I hear from some of my friends out there who are listening to all of this is, okay, like they're having hydrogen leak issues here at the beginning with one specific area, whereas the hydrogen leaks and the hydrogen problems sort of cropped up 9 years into the shuttle program and then annoyingly right at the tail end. When from your experience, right? Like bad luck of the draw, hitting these now, or is it something like with the size of the system that might make this a not so great comparison between the two programs for the issues that are being faced?
So I would tell you, we had leaks, gas detector things going off almost every time we counted down the shuttle. And not hydrogen only, but oxygen. We had some blowing helium leaks. I can remember we almost got into trouble on STS-26 with hypergolic leaks before launch. So there have been leaks on and off, and it's kind of the nature of the business. And I've seen a little bit of nonsense out. And I'll call it nonsense. I probably shouldn't be pejorative. That well, we just shouldn't use hydrogen. Well, that's not the issue. You've got these commodities. Some of them are cryogenic. Many of them are under high pressure, and the connections are of a sort that have to, when the engines light off and you're lifting off, they have to immediately part ways and seal perfectly to not spew out stuff on the launch pad. So they're very complex mechanisms, and getting the techniques down to make sure all those seals seal properly and don't have leaks is something that every rocket has to deal with, no matter what their propellant is. And early on, you expect to have those problems. I think the early history of the shuttle and the 16, I think it was, cryogenic loading attempts they had on the launch pad before the first flight has been a little bit overlooked in the public eye anyway. But they did have problems, and we had problems on it. Didn't just wait till 1990 and STS-35, although that was probably the most unforgettable summer of issues that we had. So I'm sure they will get it right, and we'll be able to achieve a good launch. The thing you don't want to do is make a mistake and have something bad happen. Everybody says, "Oh, hydrogen, remember the Hindenburg," right? Well, yeah, that is something that's in the back of everybody's mind, but there are many other commodities that could do serious damage if they leaked and didn't seal up properly. So it's something every rocket's got to deal with.
And in fact, I think, right, the hypergolics that the solid rocket boosters use, I mean, I think we saw pictures of the SLS crews in their safety suits as they were doing that operation. There's still a lot of hazardous operations that get done with that vehicle before you actually start putting cryos in it, right?
Right. In the shuttle program, we tried very hard. The hypergolic, very toxic chemicals that are used in the solid rocket motor steering system. We tried very hard in the shuttle program in an upgrades way to get rid of those, to provide an alternate way to get, so we didn't have to deal with them. And it just wasn't anything that worked as well. Everything, we put quite a bit of money into it, trying to make electric pumps or helium powered pumps or other things. And it just turned out that those little turbines that use this rocket fuel to spin the pump with, they're the lightest, and they're reasonably reliable. They're actually very reliable, but you are dealing with this very nasty chemical, that if you breathe it, you will be in the hospital for a long time. That happened on ASTP. People may not remember that flight, but coming in, they opened the dump valves on the reaction control system on the Apollo command module. At the same time, they opened the outside air valve to let air into the cabin, and the astronauts got quite a dose of that really nasty stuff, and a couple of them were in the hospital for several days. Anyway, they were lucky. So bad stuff, but very effective if used properly.
And Philip, I know I'm seeing all the questions coming in. I know I've got mine. I want to make sure that you got your chance for some of yours. Anything? I mean, anything sort of along those lines or differently, because we've got a lot of questions about safety and
Sure.
balancing all of that too. Yeah.
Just listening to this and kind of thinking again, we've got we just watched a couple of launch attempts for SLS, and I know Wayne, you were talking about how you joined the shuttle program in 1978, and so you got you had a perspective on, maybe looking back in hindsight. I seem to recall on the day that STS-1 landed, there was a quote, and I'm probably paraphrasing it not quite correctly, from Christopher Kraft, who said something along the lines of, "We just got infinitely smarter." And so I'm kind of curious. We're looking at this system ahead of its first launch. What your perspective was, kind of comparing where you thought you were ahead of the first space shuttle launch with, after getting a handful of flights of experience within the program, how much a level of maturity that you get from just going through it and doing it several times.
Well, I was pretty young in those days. We were pretty junior. I'd been, as I said, at NASA about 3 years at the time of the first shuttle flight. And we're all in our early 20s and cocky and thought we knew everything. And one of the things that I look back on those days was how little we really knew. People of my era that were just joining the space program, and I did a retrospective. Let's see, 1981, so 2021 last year was the 40th. I'm doing that right, 40th anniversary of STS-1, and so my organization said, "Would you do a retrospective on STS-1 and tell us all the things that you learned?" And I started pulling my notes out and reading a couple of articles, and there's a really good book called Into the Black that I recommend about that. But there were 6 things that happened on that first flight that were very nearly fatal. We nearly caused the shuttle to crash on its first flight 6 times. And I'm just amazed when I go back and read that we made the decision 4 years before that we would fly the first flight with people on it, right? NASA had never done that before. We always flew spacecraft without a crew in an uncrewed manner, and learned significant lessons without putting a crew at risk. But here on the shuttle, we put them on the very first one. Long story about why that is, but it was very risky. It was very risky. And after that flight, people sat down and said, "Well, we've got to change this, we've got to change that, we've got to change the other thing." I think my moment came, again, I was the propulsion officer and on the entry team, the deorbit entry team, and our big thing was making sure that the deorbit burn of those orbital maneuvering system engines you can see back there in the back of the shuttle was just right, put the shuttle in the right trajectory to re-enter. And we did that. We made sure we had the right amount of propellant, and the engines were pointed in the right direction, and all those things that you have to do. And the engine firing went off, and the crew reported good burn, and the tracking confirmed that. And in those days, we didn't have, the teeter satellites, so we were over the Guam tracking station, and they went out of range of the tracking station, and it was going to be 20 30 minutes, I can't remember, before they came into view of the Southern California kind of tracking stations. And no communication, no tracking, no idea what was going on. And we all kind of looked at each other and said, well, hope those heat tiles work, you know?
Right.
Because you can hear, I believe you can really hear the relief in the Capcom's voice when Columbia came into range and she was okay and on energy and on ground track and all of that on STS-1. Yeah.
You know, one of the things you do as a flight controller, a flight director in the flight team is you do all these simulated missions, and training team is out there coming up with all these scenarios of everything that can go wrong, And so you practice these disaster drills. How do we get them back on course? How do we, fix all these leaks that are happening or fire or whatever? And so by the time you actually fly, you've been through 1,000 of these things, but still you worry about the one maybe you didn't anticipate.
And I mean, for you as a member of the flight control team, and then as a flight director too, before the Teachers Network was complete for, or good enough for that sort of continuous coverage, what is going through your mind when you have no telemetry downlink from the vehicle?
Well, you're always trying to take the last information you had, and if there's a situation, if there's a problem going on, how can we be prepared so the next time we talk to the crew, the next time they come in view of the tracking station, we have a plan for them. We used to practice the communication because you sometimes only had 6 minutes and it might be an hour before you talk to them again. So we know they had a problem. We put together a plan. Now let's rehearse how you're going to use that 6 minutes to communicate this complicated plan over the radio to the crew so they can make it work. And that was a real art form back in those days. It's not something that we really have to deal with, in recent memory, because we've got virtually continuous communications, which is a luxury. But we could talk to the crew about 12% of the time. They were out of communication on those early shuttle flights on the order of 85+% of the time. So you had to really be fast with your solutions.
Yeah, So speaking of another moment in a potential shuttle flight that you would have had to have been really fast with some solutions, as a flight director, what were your thoughts on the potential return to launch site abort scenarios? Do you share sort of John Young's assessment of that it required a continuous string of miracles, or did you have a little bit more confidence? And maybe a more fascinating question is, did that confidence level in an RTLS change throughout the 30 years of the program?
Well, yeah, first of all, it did. So everybody remembers that great quotation that John Young put out, because before STS-1, he and Bob Crippen were the crew for the first shuttle flight. Before STS-1, there were some people that had proposed we would do an RTLS. Rather than go to orbit, we would do a suborbital flight test, they called it. And that was the basis of that memo of John's in 1979 or so that said, well, and he was right. At that state of our understanding, it was, a continuous set of miracles interspersed by acts of God to make it successful. It was something that could have worked. Now, we did a post-analysis. I didn't, but some of the other guys did of the STS-1 trajectory, and it actually would not have worked on STS-1. We had a guidance funny, and the spacecraft was lofted, and the trajectory would not have supported an RTLS if an engine had gone out. So once again, we were fortunate. We learned how to correct that, and in subsequent flights, where they got away from that lofting of the trajectory. So over the course of 30 years, our understanding of what it took to successfully pull off an RTLS improved. And I'm convinced, pardon me, is that clock bothering you? It's right here by my no.
Oh, no, all good.
Um, it improved, and I'm convinced that, starting probably with the post Challenger era, that we would have reasonably been able to pull that off if we had needed to. And fortunately, we never had to demonstrate that. I always felt, okay, so here's the perversity of being a flight director, is you train for all these contingencies. You train over and over again for RTLS, transatlantic abort, abort once around, loss of 2 fuel cells, or loss of all the Freon loop cooling, and you do all these cases, 2 main buses down out of the 3, and you do all this training, and you get through a nominal launch, and you get on orbit, and you kind of say, well, gee, I didn't get to use any of that. There's a little piece of me that's disappointed in a perverse kind of a way that we didn't have to do any of that. We always talk about STS-93. I think I wrote up some of that stuff, and it's kind of famous as one of the flights where a lot of things happened during the launch phase. And even that didn't come close to many of the training runs that we had. And the flight team didn't really have to intervene. The crew really didn't have to do much on that day, whereas we were trained for all these contingencies. Land the shuttle on the Beeline Expressway between Orlando and the Cape, or one of those little airfields down in Southern California. We studied where all the little runways are down there. Bernard Fox, Palmdale, all we had plans. You'll land at the at Rosemont Dry Lake instead of all those things, and we were prepared, and we didn't have to use it, so that's a good thing.
So this sort of jogs a memory, and this is from one of your blog posts. I'm pretty sure it was STS-37 and Atlantis coming back into California, where
I don't remember this flight. You can't.
Yeah. But this is the one that they ended up low on energy, and it was really good that we were already aiming for a dry lake bed runway. What sort of happened with that one, and what were you thinking in that moment when that realization sort of hit, or did that realization hit before her wheels actually touched?
So one of the beauties of being in Houston is you don't know exactly where the commander touched down until the report comes in the next day. So I didn't feel bad until the next day. And the next day they told me, and I thought, I better get my resume together, because, you're not supposed to do that. So it was a very interesting weather day. You're flying, or the commander is flying, the world's largest glider. There is no way to go around. You are committed. And you really kind of are committed an hour before landing. So you make a decision to execute the deorbit burn roughly an hour before you're going to arrive at the runway. And so you've got what the weather is now and what the predictions. And we all know about weather predictions, right? We have the best weather predictors in the world, but still. So the guidance system on the orbiter is very sensitive to the upper air, the wind currents. And on that particular day, we only had one runway that we could use out of the whole Edwards complex. The concrete runway 2204, both ends were no go. All the other lake bed runways, 2305, all those other runways were all no go. But runway 33 on the lake bed, which had never been used before, never did that approach before, although the crews trained all the approaches, was the only one, and it was just marginally go. And so we gave a go and deorbited, and as we came in, the wind shear, the level at which the jet stream or the upper air winds were going at a high velocity versus right below that, there was a much lower velocity. That interface dropped below 10,000 feet. And what that did is it fouled up the guidance algorithm on the shuttle, who's looking for certain parameters, altitude, velocity, range to go at 10,000 feet on final approach. And when that wind shear later dropped, the computer got confused, and just about the same time that the commander's taking over, it finds out he didn't have enough energy to actually make the runway. So he landed a touchdown, did an admirable job. Steve Nagel, may rest in peace, did a great job of landing that shuttle. But he did touch down some 734 feet, number that's etched in my memory, short of the threshold. Short of the threshold.
Wow.
Not 2,500 feet past the threshold, which is what you're supposed to do. And the only thing that saved us, well, it was the lake bed runway, right? So the threshold's a little arbitrary. It's a line painted on the sand, right? So and we always prepared 1,000 feet of underrun. So as the party line, my boss said, well, it would have been safe on any of our runways because we have a prepared 1,000 feet of underrun, but that doesn't make it any difference. It was stupid. It was a mistake. And we put the crew at some risk. And I got to fly it in the simulator, and motion-based simulator in Houston a few days later, and it was just eye-watering. It was really tough day. And we should not have put them into that. And the red flag probably started off with the fact you've only got one runway go, all right, out of the whole complex. And it's not go by a lot. And so,
yeah,
you look back on it and say, well, I'm not going to do that again.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We were sort of saying there, sort of like kind of wants me to go toward this question for you personally. There's a lot of reward that we sort of talked about being a flight director, when you feel that success, when you've led the team and the vehicle and the crew through a good mission and they're back on the ground. So I offer this question as both the good challenge or the bad challenge, however you wish to answer it. But when you think back to your days as either the program manager, deputy program manager, or a flight director, what was your most challenging day?
Well, that's a tough question because there were a lot of challenging days. I mean, every time we got ready to count down the shuttle to go launch, and it was my call to say we're go, from an abort weather and crew system kind of thing. Every time we landed the shuttle and you had to make that decision, yes, you go for deorbit burn. We could have waved off and watched it for another orbit or another day or something. Every time you did that, you knew that you were making a decision that could have real consequences, and it was always with us. I mean, they had the Challenger accident when I was still a propulsion officer, before I got into the flight director office. And I think a lot of us younger folks had always thought that we were kind of bulletproof, and that no matter what could happen, we could pull it out, right? We could save the crew. And of course, Challenger proved that wrong, because nothing anybody could have done in mission control after they launched would have made any difference, couldn't have made any difference. So that was a really significant emotional event for a lot of us, that we realized we're not, this is not just fun and games, right? I don't think we ever really took it as fun and games, but it's much, much more serious than we thought. So it's every time you make one of those decisions, you worry about it, then you do the right thing.
Yeah. And I guess sort of along those same lines too, what goes through your mind when you're the flight director and you're listening and something is going on, the vehicle is in the air, the vehicle is in orbit or is coming down and your teams are talking through issues, whether they're serious or minor that can become serious very quickly. What's going through your head knowing that you're listening to this, you're listening to your experts tell you things, but at a certain point you've got to stop listening and make a decision because time is finite in this moment?
Yeah, that's the thing that they really impressed on our training, was they would try to overload the flight director. You can give a problem to the electrical officer, you can give a problem to the propulsion officer, you can give a problem to the guidance officer, you can give a problem to the mechanical officer, and those guys, they'll handle a problem, without any problem, without even breaking a sweat. But if you have all five of those happen at one time, then the node in the decision making is the flight director, and it's like, which problem do you attack first? And that was the bulk of the. Sometimes I thought the bulk of the training is not just knowing how to solve a problem or a couple of problems, but how to prioritize. Which one do you take on first? Which is the most important? And which one can wait and maybe get attention?
It's like triage.
It is exactly like triage. It's exactly like triage.
Yeah, that's interesting. You were talking about a few of the close calls on STS-1. Can you remember a few of them?
Okay.
Just sort of to.
So we had the trajectory where it lofted. We had overpressure on the launch pad when the solid rocket motors ignited, that bounced back and did actual damage to the vehicle and came very close to actually buckling in the bottom of the external tank. We had a guidance issue during reentry. Oh gosh, now see, it's been a year since I did that. I'm going to have to go back and look at my notes again. But there were 5 different significant issues that were very nearly fatal. Could have been fatal to the crew. On that launch that we learned from and fixed. So, if you look, Phil, I know you'll remember, we had all these water trough buckets in the flame trench, right?
The sausages,
and
right?
They look so silly. I mean, they're silly, but they were a brilliant way to attenuate the shock wave that would come down from the solid rocket motors when they ignited, hit the bottom of the flame trench, and reflect back up into the base of the orbiter. So into the base of the external tank, really. So we learned a lot of things. We did, really did.
Yeah, I think they did. I think they had they did a sound suppression. They did like a sort of like a platter of water when they did the green run with the core stage at Stennis for exactly the same thing, to have to attenuate that sound coming off the flame bucket and rebounding back onto the aft end of the stage.
Well, and that was for the 4, SF, I wouldn't call them SSMEs that they've got, but they really haven't launched anything with those 5-segment boosters yet. So we'll see, when they actually light those off, what happens. And I hope that their modeling is better and their analysis is better, and they've learned from all those shuttle engines. But yeah.
Yeah, we sort of speaking about that and like picking up on something that I know is a big lesson learned from the shuttle program, because of the off-center thrust and how the twang maneuver would shift it. Those solids on the shuttle had 4 explosive hold down bolts that had to blow a fraction of a second before you lit the solids. And I know they've taken those off of SLS because of the inline design. They don't need them anymore, so they're just going to let the physical weight hold it down. But did you ever have the dreaded single channel or dual channel failure to blow one of those T0 hold down bolts on the shuttle?
So we never experienced a failure in the pyrotechnics. On STS-112, we lost their 2 signals to set off. There's always redundancy to set off the pyrotechnic devices. And on STS-112, because of some corrosion in the wiring connector, we only got 1 signal to the hold down pyrotechnics. It's interesting if you think about it. For the shuttle, at that point in the countdown, very late in the countdown, the shuttle computers ran the show. Ground computers were done. Okay, the shuttle program, the shuttle software programs actually issued the command inside the shuttle to go down to the tail service mast, across this interface, and into the mobile launch platform to those bolts to fire the pyrotechnics. So yeah, you've got the picture up there. There's a nice display down at the Kennedy Space Center of one of the hold-down posts in the two halves of the bolt that have been blown apart, and that always worked right. We had some other issues which are a little more complicated, but we always got the bolt to blow. On that one flight, we lost one of the two sensors, or one of the two signal lines that would have set it. So we're instead of being redundant, we were what we call zero fault tolerant, but it worked. Mm-hmm. Now there's a whole nother phenomenon about how those bolts could engage those threads, which is people get confused. That caused a lot of problems, because unlike this picture you're looking at, those two bolt halves don't just fly away. That would be a hazard in itself. So they're in a can, right? They're in a can, so they're contained, and they bounce back sometimes and would re-engage the threads on that post, and you would get a yeah, there we go. So you see the fire of the engines, and then this puff, and then as you're lifting off, that was a nice one. You didn't see the hang up, but sometimes they would get this little hang up, and you would get this joggle in the shuttle as it was taking off. Very, very subtle, but something you don't want to have happen.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Is that was STS-112? I'm trying to remember back to your blog, because talking about how the one channel didn't make it across the interface. Is that the same issue that you were saying, like in mission control, the RSLS abort light flashed, but basically the vehicle ignored it because it was like, well, I can't stop this, we're going anyway. So
the software, the ground software, detected that it didn't have both signals, and so the ground software said to the shuttle, we should stop. Redundant set launch sequence should abort. And the shuttle computers, of course, once they issue those commands, they disregarded that request. But we had a red light on the flight director console that just really got everybody's attention.
Oh boy!
Gosh,
because
it's not stressful enough.
No, it's not stressful enough. You have to stress it a little bit more.
So another good question, or an interesting question that we're getting from Copper Core, he's asking about, he's wondering if he's got the wrong mission, but he's basically saying one of those early flights, the memory is STS-3, ECOM said this is the kaboom case flight. What was that in reference to?
That was a fuel cell problem. So of course the shuttle used cryogenic hydrogen and oxygen and fuel cells to make electricity, and really there's no battery backup. I mean, it had to make electricity. It's a completely electric airplane. No electricity, nothing happens. One of my favorite scenes I laugh at every time in Space Cowboys is when they say, okay, we're going to turn the computers off and fly it manually. Well, it don't work like that. You don't fly it without the computer. So it's all electric. And so we had 3 fuel cells generating electricity, and there's a membrane in any fuel cell that separates the hydrogen side from the oxygen side, and they get together and they make water and byproduct electricity. But you really don't want there to be too much communication of too much hydrogen and oxygen. So Bill Moon was the Eagle Electrical Generation and Illumination Officer, I think is what Eagle stands for. And he was in charge of the fuel cells, and And he saw evidence in the instrumentation that this membrane was breaking down on one of the fuel cells. This is the second shuttle flight, STS-2. Dick Truly was in command. And so the flight director wasn't giving him the time of day. And he kept saying, "Flight, we got a problem. We need to do something. We need to do something." And flight director didn't want to hear it, because the flight rules said if you have a fuel cell that's failing, you have to cut the flight short. We have to come home early. And no flight director wants to do that. They're like, "Okay, well, tell me what we can do. How can we keep this going? What can we do to keep the flight going? What do we got to do?" And finally, Bill Moon, and so I'm sitting at the prop console right in front of the flight director. Flight director's right behind me. And Eagle is like 2 doors down to my right. So finally, Bill Moon stands up and he says, "This is the kaboom case, flight." And the room got real quiet. And flight director said, "Okay, we'll shut it down." And so they told the crew to shut down the fuel cell, and the flight was shortened. And we learned, more about fuel cells. And I must say the fuel cells were very reliable. I have no complaints against the fuel cells, but we did, over the course of 30 years, have a few issues and had to do that. But that was the kaboom case, And again, I was a rookie front room flight controller. I'd been in the support room before this. This is my first real day on a real flight. Be sitting in the front room, and Bill, who's an old grizzled Apollo veteran, stands up. It's like, oh my goodness, this is really, really exciting.
Sometimes standing up is the way to be heard, right?
Yeah. Well, you're trained to always communicate on the communications channels. For one thing, those channels go out to the engineering support room, and so if you're not talking on the loop, as we call it, and not everybody knows what's going on. You want to make sure everybody knows what's going on, not just 2 people. And so when you just say something over the ear without keying up your microphone, then you're not supposed to do that. But people did that from time to time.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so many good questions that we're getting here, sort of from the around the horn. But one thing that you mentioned earlier, it was about I think you said it was about 4 years before STS-1 actually flew, that the decision was made to fly that first one with crew. Was that sort of the inflection point in the program where the shuttles really could not have been flown without a crew on board? Was it really that decision to crew STS-1 where that sort of commitment to the design was made, or were they able to be flown autonomously before that decision, or was there talk about that?
Well, they were in the early design phase. And so it was one of those early design decisions. And I think I've got somewhere in my files, nothing classified in my files, by the way, that I took away. But I do have some boxes of files. I think I've got that memo, and the discussion topic, if you not think about it, in 1974 or 5, about the state of autonomous flight control, there wasn't, right? There had been one digitally controlled aircraft before the shuttle. There was an experimental F-8 out at Edwards that they had flown digital fly-by-wire airplane. All the airplanes were, okay, so if you go back to the Wright brothers, right? When Orville or Wilbur pushed on their control panel, they had cables, they had wire that connected to the parts of the wing that caused the aileron, what we call ailerons today, to move, or elevator, or what have you. And if you go through all the 1920s and 30s, it was all kind of cables, right? The pilot's got his hand on the stick, but when he moves the stick, it's really a lever that's pulling these cables that make the rudder or the elevator or whatever move. and then you get into hydraulics. So then they were like power steering in your car, where they have this hydraulic thing that helps, but you're still kind of physically connected. Well, you come to the middle 70s and people are talking about digital fly-by-wire, where the computer controls it. So in the shuttle, and this FAU was, I think, the only plane that flew digitally before the shuttle. When the astronaut had his hand on the stick in the shuttle, he had a joystick, and it did nothing but communicate to the computer. There was no physical connection. There was no wire, no cable, no hydraulic. I mean, there may be hydraulics, but that stick was only talking to the computer. And so this was in the very earliest days. There were lots of questions as I read the history of those days about whether it would really work, and whether or not you really had to have people in the loop, in the decision-making authority. We never demonstrated automatic landing capability of the shuttle. There was an auto land capability, but we never demonstrated it. I think STS-3 came close, but I think in every case the commander actually took over and flew the landing. So there was a question, I think, in the early design phase: are we going to try very hard to design this so well and test it so well that it doesn't have to have people on board, it can fly uncrewed? Or are we just going to build this kind of like an airplane, which requires people to be on board to actually fly it? And so the decision was made that the first flight would have crew on board, which I think was a pretty gutsy call.
Gotcha. So I kind of want to shift a little bit to a look ahead to the future, almost, and looking with SLS and everything like that. From a mission control standpoint, what are some of the ways that you think mission control will have to change or adapt when we start talking about these flights where you're going to have communication delays with the crews and with the vehicle and with all the telemetry? What are some of the struggles that mission control is going to have to face in that regard?
Well, mission control has evolved over time anyway. So if you think about, we were talking earlier about the days before we had continuous comm and how mission control, Gemini, Mercury, Apollo Earth orbit missions, Skylab even, and the early shuttle missions, we had to work very hard to get our communications packaged into these little communication windows that we had. And so that was a whole different technique than we had in later shuttle or ISS now, where you've got the luxury of having just about 100% communication time. So that's evolved already. And of course, in Apollo, they learned very quickly how to deal with the 1.3, I think it is, second delay. And you hear that the crews got really good at practicing on not talking over each other, because it's a natural thing, in normal communication. If you say something and you don't hear anything, you're going to start talking again. Well, you got to wait actually 2.5 or 3 seconds for a round trip to the moon. So I think they'll get back to that without too much trouble. I think the real question is going to be on the way to Mars, okay? Because there's so far out there and there's so little the ground can do. You're on your own. One of the nice things about Artemis being the stepping stone toward first to the moon and into Mars is Artemis operates in cislunar space, and we're relatively close, right? It's like learning how to do that all over again is preparing for these tougher missions. So it will evolve. It's going to evolve. I think it's interesting. You talk about mission control evolving. It's interesting that everybody now has their own control center. The cargo people, the Cygnus people, have their own control center, right? And they run their spacecraft, right? And the SpaceX famously has their own control center in Hawthorne, and they've run both the cargo Dragon missions and now the crew Dragon missions, even if they go to the space station or not, right? They have their own control center. I was fortunate to have a discussion a few days ago with some of my old friends that are still at work at the Johnson Space Center, and they're talking about the fact that, you know, there's a little bit of a debate about the Artemis lander. You know, who gets to be mission control, who is in charge, right? Now, I had always thought, you know, shades of Gene Kranz, it will always be Houston and NASA and so forth, but maybe not, you know. So, you know, will a crew say on Artemis 3, Hawthorne, you know, Artemis, we're at, you know, South Pole Station, or whatever the heck they're going to say, you know, or will it be Houston? Artemis,
Yeah.
you know? I mean, what's it going to be? I mean, who's going to, so this whole shared authority thing, I think the space station's been very interesting because, you know, we've got a control center in Houston. We've got the control center in Korolev City in Moscow, the TSUP. We've got a control center in Japan. We've got the Canadian control center up in St. John. They've got all these control centers doing their, you know, parts of the space station. They've learned how to work together, but it's taken a while. So how is this going to work? It's going to evolve. It'll be different. I don't know. My crystal ball's cloudy, you know. I would like it, you know, being an old guy, the way we did it in Apollo clearly is the right way, right? I say that tongue in cheek, but I think it will evolve and it will be different. So,
yeah. And as we sort of talk about the as we talk about that evolution, when you think about the SLS teams right now, and you think about, you know, the monumental task that they have of getting a new vehicle safely on its way to hand off to mission control and hand off to the flight directors. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to talk to Charlie, or if you got the opportunity, what piece of advice would you pass along to her and her teams right now?
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to talk to Charlie several times. I find her very impressive. She's smart. She's got a smart team, and they're very energetic, and their heart's in the right place. They are trying very hard. They are trying very hard. The thing you got to remember though is this is the first time that team has launched a vehicle. I mean, this is not the shuttle launch team, right? They disbanded 11 years ago. 80, 90% of those people are gone physically, you know, and so it's a new team. Mike Bulger and his team under Charlie, you know, they're learning, and so they've got a lot to learn, but they're very smart and they're very hardworking. And, you know, I've given Charlie some advice, but she knows how to run her team. She's smart. And I don't think there's a whole lot that an old guy like me can tell her that she didn't already know.
Well, you know, and one thing that I sort of draw a parallel to, maybe I shouldn't draw the parallel to it, and I don't draw it because of any, you know, overall connection to Columbia, but, you know, I imagine that as the SLS launch team is stepping through these first time issues, that she's also potentially getting conflicting advice from different consoles, right? From different folks who might have different views on what can we do? What's the next step we should do? Should we stop? Should we not? And I very much remember the STS-121 flight readiness review, where there was not unanimous consent to proceed to liftoff. How from your perspective, right? Like, how do you balance that when you're getting conflicting pieces of information, or not information, conflicting paths forward? Because everyone's trying to think. Yeah,
I would tell you, every decision you get conflicting information.
Yes.
There isn't a decision that I was ever a part of that there wasn't conflicting information, and people advocating different courses of action. And by the way, I think that's a good thing. I mean, I'm not smart enough. Jim Free's not smart enough. Charlie Thompson's not smart enough to know everything about every system in it. So the debate is extremely valuable. You learn a lot. As a matter of fact, I did have occasion to talk to the folks about that. It's really important to seek out dissenting opinion. I mean, if there's anything we learned after Columbia, is how important that is to stop and say, well, we think we know what we're doing, but does somebody have a different idea? Are we missing something? Is there another thing we ought to consider? Now, that's going to slow you down, but maybe you need to be slowed down, right? So I've been advocating to my friends there that it's always good to have some conflicting opinions and to take the time to explore the background to make sure you understand. Sometimes people are worried about something that's not that important. Okay, fine. Sometimes they're worried about something that is extremely important that they just hadn't been able to articulate in a good way. So you really need to, as a decider, as a decision maker, you really need to take the time to make sure you understand the situation before you make a decision. But there comes a time when you have to decide.
Yeah.
And you just hope you've got enough information to make the right decision.
So kind of along those lines, right? I think there are two things. There's one big thing that I sort of pulled out of that answer, though you didn't say the words back to back, and that's schedule pressure. You've obviously got the rocket and the systems that are telling you if they are ready or not, but then you also have a reality that this mission needs to launch at some point to allow the rest of the program to continue. We're sort of seeing this, and I've got a different question about this too, but like, I think, what are your thoughts on where we sit right now with SLS? Do you see, from you personally, do you see anything that's concerning that maybe, stop, take a moment, don't try and rush this out the door in September, October is fine, like, it's a tricky thing to balance, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And let me tell you, schedule pressure is a good thing. I mean, if you didn't have some kind of schedule pressure, you wouldn't get anything done, right? Mm-hmm. If my wife said she wanted the kitchen ready by Christmas, then I've got some schedule pressure, right? And if she didn't say that, I might never get it done, right? Yes. So you got it, life is full of schedule pressure. It's not that there's schedule pressure, it's how do you react? Do you do things in an appropriate manner? You really have to have a schedule, because if you didn't have a schedule, we'd never be finished, right? So you've got a schedule. You want to try to get a flight off, before the end of the century or something. You've got to have a plan. You've got to try to adhere to that plan, but you have to be sensitive to the problems that crop up and be willing to say, okay, I'm going to have to bump my schedule. I'm going to need to take a little bit more time. What I've seen of this team is they are reacting appropriately. I haven't seen anybody make a call yet, and granted, I'm not, terribly involved, but from my knothole, I've not seen anybody make a decision yet that says they did not properly assess an issue and make a good decision because they had their eye on the clock too much, right? If anything, it might be a little bit the other way. And I'm not sure that's, for the first time launch, that's probably appropriate too. Right?
Yeah. So I'm curious with your, with your experience in the shuttle program and, the delicate balance that has to be also walked between what the agency might want to do and what range safety says, oh, hang on a minute, let's stop. I think to a lot of people, it's, when we heard going into the SLS attempt that the flight termination system batteries were certified for 20 days, and then they got that waiver to 25. I think everyone sort of understood how you go from 20 to 25 and, and get that waiver, get that approval. I think what's a little bit more difficult for some folks, and maybe this is just because they haven't really talked about a lot about how the flight termination system batteries work, is how you can go from 20 days to, 50 is fine, which seems to be what the ask is. And obviously the range has not given their answer yet, but you had this interesting tweet from yourself saying that you had to go to the range a few times to ask for things, and your batting average, I think what you said was, let's just say my batting average was low. What's that balance? I mean, like, what was your experience with that? Because obviously everyone's trying to achieve the same thing, but there are different considerations that the two agencies are having to look at here.
So tell me, Chris, where did you stand for the first Artemis 1 countdown? Where were you physically for the countdown Monday 2 weeks ago?
I was on the press site grounds right by the countdown clock. And
did they brief you about the range safety violation that you were involved with at the press site?
No, they did not.
Okay, well, you need to ask them, because the E sub C is above the range safety limit for the press site, or for Banana Creek, or for the Causeway. If you get one of those nice Causeway passes, that you put the placard in your windshield of your car to drive in the Causeway, there's a little fine print down at the bottom where it says you recognize that you're taking a risk by being there. Well, that's the lawyers made them put that on there because you are in violation of the range safety limit by a little bit. So the range safety principle says that for any given operation, if I may not quote this exactly right, but there has to be less than 30 chances in a million that any single person will be injured.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. And when you put a big rocket on the launch pad, well, okay, so they built the launch control center, the press site and all that 3 miles back from the launch pad, because in the 1960s, they thought, that was good enough. They had some kind of calculation that said we probably won't, if the rocket blows up, we probably won't kill anybody at the press site. But as we've gotten more sophisticated in our understanding, there is a risk. Okay. And what the range has said, historically, I don't know this for a fact about Artemis, but I do know it about the shuttle. The range said you're letting all these the public people in to places like the Causeway and Banana Creek and the press site, and even non-essential government personnel in the Launch Complex 39 VAB area. You are in violation of that 30 in a million by some small amount. So we will not give you permission to do that, but we will allow it since you're on your property, Mr. NASA, not Air Force, not Space Force. You can waive that for your people on. So did you know that?
No, I did not.
No, you didn't.
No.
So it was
the
always
only thing I remember is as soon as they start stacking solid rockets in the VAB, we have to sign a little waiver with emergency contact.
So yeah, they know the next of kin. Look, the risk is very low. I don't want to scare anybody off and not go to the Causeway or something. I was probably a little closer than Causeway where I was, but I can remember sitting in that firing room, looking out the big windows at the shuttle lifting off, having gone through those calculations with people, knowing that those big shutters, I think they've taken them off now, those big shutters on the front of the windows, they wouldn't protect you. That was a sunshade, right?
Yeah.
If the rocket comes our way, we'll be toast here, right? Now, the chances of the rocket coming that way are really small. And I was willing to take the risk. And if, I don't know, life is full of risk. It's a question of where do you draw the line? And the range has been given the authority by the President of the United States to protect the public in all circumstances. And somehow back in the midst of time, they came up with this crazy number that said, analytically, you have to demonstrate that you have less than 30 chances in a million of hurting a single person from any accident that might happen, any uninvolved. That's not the people that are working on the rocket. That's the public. That's the press. That's,
Okay.
anybody off the site. So the range takes us very seriously. And by golly, I'm glad they do. We don't want people. Did you ever hear how range safety first got put on a rocket? There's a wonderful story about the V2
please
that
tell
they
me. Yeah.
launched from White Sands in the 1940s. And they had
yeah.
captured V2s out there at White Sands, and one of them took off and flew across the Rio Grande River and crashed into a cemetery in Juarez, Mexico. And there was nothing they could do about it. They just, lit the thing and it went, right? And so they decided that they shouldn't ought to do that again. International incident and all that. Landed in a cemetery. They were all dead there, so it didn't matter. But they decided they needed to put a destruct charge on these rockets, so if it went the wrong direction, they could blow it up. And that's where range safety started in the late 1940s. And that's still what the range is. They're independent. They have criteria, and you need to meet those criteria or you don't fly, period, end of discussion. That's Eastern Range, Western Range. NASA's got to do the same thing at the Wallops flight facility. And frankly, it's a good thing. So you come to something like how well does your destruct system, how your flight termination system, we love these euphemisms, how well does your flight termination system work? Can you prove that it will work if the rocket is tumbling and coming apart already, and it will still do what it needs to do, right? So you do tests. First of all, it's got to be independent, right? So it's got its own radio receiver, it's got its own battery, it's independent of the rest of the rocket system. So if the rocket, if the batteries that run the rocket go down and it loses all radio communication and whatnot, the range safety system will still work, can still receive a command and do its thing. And so to fly any rocket out of the range, whether it's got people on it or not, you have to demonstrate in a technical sense to the Eastern Range that your system will work. You have to have done tests. You have to have analysis. You have to show that it works, that it will work under all circumstances. And sometimes those circumstances can be kind of extreme. I don't know what the minimum temperature is, but as batteries get cold, they put out less electricity. So if you have to work at 32 degrees, that one day a year that it gets to 32 degrees, Cape Canaveral, it's still got to work, then you can rest assured that when it's 90 degrees, you're probably in no danger of it not working, right? From that particular thing. So what I suspect, and I don't know that they're doing, is they're going back and looking at that analysis and saying, okay, Mr. Range, we gave you this package of information, but we got some more tests, and if the temperature is warmer or something, then the batteries all discharge over time, right? You leave a battery alone, it discharges. So however many days they proved without a shadow of a doubt, 100%, it's going to work. 20 days, no question. 25 days is probably 99.999, kind of a thing. Now you get out to 50 days, then you may have to say some things. Well, we won't fly if the temperature is less than 40 degrees or 50 degrees or, something. There will be a technical discussion. They do not write a waiver because they like you or you've got a schedule issue. This is not like baseball. Right? This is not a baseball waiver. This is an engineering waiver. It comes from technical data proving that the end item that you want will still work. Okay. And so there may be some restrictions on, I don't know, temperature is the one that comes to mind, but there are other things. And if they demonstrate to the range, who can be real sticklers about this kind of thing, that the system will still work without having to roll back to the barn and I don't know whether it's retest or recharge or whatever the heck it is, then the range may grant them a waiver, but they won't do it just because NASA says, hey, we got a little schedule problem and we'd like to launch early. And the range will say, yeah, right, come back come back when you're ready, right? Have you ever been to the Department of Motor Vehicles? Right?
Oh yeah.
If you don't bring your stuff to the window, the Department of Motor Vehicles, what does the lady there say?
See you
Next
later.
in line,
Yep.
next in line, right? That's okay. That's the model range is. Right?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, all right. Well, we have another question. I guess this is not quite
I'm
on the
sorry, am I
along the
talking
same
too
lines.
much?
No,
this
not
is
at all.
great.
Not at all.
There's a aviation lover was asking this question, and this is the big picture question. Talking about shuttle, and I think the two accidents play a large, or sort of loom large in the history of the program. And I think some of us who watched for all 30 plus years of operations can think of other things in addition to those flights. But it's led to kind of the reputation of the system and the program is do you think that reputation is deserved in terms of it, the accidents playing such a large role in what people remember about it?
Well, I wish it wasn't the case. Okay, let's say that right up front. I think that the expectation was set too high about the shuttle being safe. There was a lot of hype in the late 70s, early 80s that, it was going to be like going into space on the shuttle is going to be like going to, Orlando Airport and getting on, an airliner and flying somewhere. It's not the case. It wasn't the case then. I don't know exactly how all that hype got started, but in the popular mind, I think the bar was set pretty high, and any of us that were in the program knew that it's risky. Okay. It remained risky. And you could say, well, could we have designed a better vehicle or a safer vehicle? Absolutely. There were a lot of things that were done that in retrospect shouldn't have been done in the design phase. I'm talking about the fact that we had no crew bailout capability, right? We had the ejection seats for the first couple of flights, but for the whole crew, for the big crews, 6, 7, 8 people, we didn't have that. We didn't have pressure suits. We had those stupid motorcycle helmet things that they wore. There was we fooled ourselves, right? NASA fooled ourselves into believing that it was safer than it was. And in a cold review of the facts, says that we had a 1 chance in 9 of killing the crew on the first shuttle mission. Okay. And probably for the first dozen shuttle missions, it was hovering around a 1 in 10 or 12 chance. And would you really want to do that? Would you really want to fly if you had those kind of statistics? Well, at the end of the program, it was up around 1 in 90, if I remember the number right. And that's still not great. Would you put your kids on the school bus if they had a 1 chance in 90 of not making it to school? Really. It's a risky business. Now, I think we learned a lot. We don't want to put a fragile heat shield in an area where tessent debris can damage it. Solid rockets have some great advantages, but they also come with some big concerns. Liquid rockets do too, right? So as we go forward, following the aviation example, as people learned the hard way in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, how to build airplanes safer, we will learn how to build spaceships more safely. And I certainly hope that future spaceships, will be much safer than the shuttle ones, because frankly, it wasn't safe enough. End of discussion.
So when you look at the when you look at Starship, right, which is trying to take a lot of those lessons learned for reusability, placing the heat shield, in a place where it cannot be struck by ascent debris from a side mount design. What are your thoughts as you see Starship under development? Both as a lunar lander, but as one where they really want to launch and land crew
Right.
on that vehicle too. What are your thoughts on what we're seeing so far with that development?
I don't know a whole lot about Starship, right? I read what comes out on your webpage, right? Some stuff, but I don't have any inside information. I know they've got people that are really working hard on it. That is a very big, complicated vehicle. And I wish them well. And if anything, I can say this: don't bet against SpaceX. I mean, they have demonstrated a remarkable degree of safety and reliability with Falcon 9 and Dragon, and I think they're taking that into Starship. But it is a huge, complex vehicle, much more complicated than what they've done before, and so it's a challenge, and I wish them well. NASA has put them on the critical path to the first lunar landing. And so I trust that NASA made that decision, understanding, the pros and cons there. But I wish them well. It's good luck. I really do hope it works, right?
I think we all do. I mean, to me, right, looking at it and what it promises, right, is very much sort of like sitting at a similar place before the shuttle program began its flight operations. I imagine it's a very similar place, right? There's a lot of promise to it. If it works, it could be absolutely revolutionary for how we do business in space, but there's a long way to go before it has proven what it needs to prove to be able to do all of those things, right? And sort of be the workhorse all in one, which, wow, doesn't that sound familiar from 40 years ago?
Yes, it does. I would tell you that's not a good plan, having one system as your sole way to get there and back. But no, I don't want to take anything away from them. They've got smart people. They're putting a lot of effort into it. They've got a huge hardware-rich program going on, but they're not alone, right? Other people are also working very hard on big rockets, and it's a wonderful time to be in the space business. I got to tell you, when I came to work at NASA in 1978, I thought, well, we'll do the shuttle thing for a couple of years, and then we'll build a space station, which of course will be the assembly point, and then we'll be off to the moon and Mars, and I will have most of my career working, with the guys going to Mars. And it didn't quite turn out that way. So where I am in my point in life, I want them to get on with it, because I want to see this before I, go move into the home for old folks. I want to see people back on the moon to stay, and I want to see preparations in a very serious way being made to go to Mars and the other places in the solar system.
So sort of to that end, and I know we're sort of coming to the end of our time availability here for today as well, but what sort of along the lines of what you just said, your post-NASA career has been in the consulting world. So what are you seeing in the consulting world? How are you sort of helping to bring all those things that you learned and developed throughout, the shuttle program and the ISS program to, make sure that our transitions to the next programs are happening smoothly, to make sure that roadmap is moved out? Because finally, I think I actually said this and screamed it when Axiom said, okay, we're going to attach our modules to the ISS. And then when ISS is done, we detach. And I went, oh my gosh, finally, we've learned the lesson, no gap. Yeah,
we need to not have a gap. That's for sure. And what I've been trying to do is take these lessons that I learned in my 35-ish year career, and all of these close calls and things that we said, oh gosh, we didn't think about that, and try to bring those to the new generation so that they're a step smarter starting out, that they will not repeat the dumb mistakes that we made. So I consider that to be the most important thing I can do is, you really need to think through that again and make sure your plan really is robust and resilient. So that's what I do. And I find it very, very enjoyable. There are a lot of smart people working on many exciting new things. And I think the future is really bright. I think we're going to see a lot of movement in the next few years. I really think we will, and innovative designs and more reliable too.
Well, Wayne, we could have filled hours upon hours upon hours of discussion. I feel like I barely got to scratch the surface, and Philip, I feel like I monopolized our questions a little bit there, but
You're fine.
But Wayne, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. I'm sure we'll definitely want you back at on a future episode as well. But I did also want to direct folks before our goodbyes over to your blog, because if you are interested in a lot more deep dives into some of the things that we talked about here, I know you've got great posts on so many things, but I know a few that we touched upon were the STS-121 FRR decisions and what happened during the launch of STS-112 as well are all on there. And from a historian and also just a spaceflight reporters, thank you for that. That blog has been absolutely fascinating to read over the last few years.
So, it's a virtue of the fact after I got sent to headquarters, they said, Mr. Hale, there's this new stuff called social media, and we want you to learn how to do that. And I did, and it's kind of fun. So just trying to put out the history as I saw it out there. So if people find it interesting, that's great. Yeah. So
the STS-93, the posts that you did on STS-93 were really interesting. Just some things that you don't hear about like the engine controllers averaging the channel data, things like that was really interesting.
Cool. Good. Well, good. So, well, it's my pleasure to be with you guys. We'll do this again sometime. And good luck. I appreciate the coverage that you guys provide to the space effort all around the world. And it helps me stay informed in areas where I'm not consulting. So that's great.
Well, that means a lot, Wayne, and thank you so much to again to you for your career, your insight, and incredible ways that you can answer questions and just let us know exactly what you mean by them. Thank you. That's a skill that I really do appreciate. Thank you.
Well, and they're mostly true. So I try to be accurate. And insofar as my memory works. So yeah, and fortunately, there's a big coterie of people out there that can correct me if I get something wrong. So every time you write a blog, there's somebody says, "Well, no, it didn't exactly." Not okay. That's fine. So good. Exactly.
And Philip Sloss, thank you so much for joining us here today as well, bringing your shuttle knowledge and expertise to the questions as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, anytime. This was fun.
Great.
And also, of course, we absolutely could not do this without all of our members. Thank you to everyone who participated, especially our launch director and flight engineer members. That continued support that you give us each month is what allows programs like this and guests like Wayne to be on with us, connecting our history to our future here in space. But thank you so much to all of our members and to everyone who participated today. As always, we had way more questions than we could actually get through in our allotted time, but thank you so much. And Wayne, will you be back for the next Artemis launch attempts? I hear we were just a few miles away from each other here last week.
So I had one of my clients wanted me to be available to them on launch day, and we'll see if they want to have me back. It was fun. It was kind of great. After 2 years of not going anywhere almost, it was great to be back at the Cape and see a lot of my old friends down there. And so, yeah, I hope so. Let's see.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again, Wayne. We'll let you get on with the rest of your weekend and definitely let you get back to your family. And Philip, the same. And to everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us. Ah,
I'll show you
yes.
my JPL shirt because I got to go out to JPL and talk with him a
Nice.
couple of years ago, and so I feel
Nice.
a little tiny contribution to the Perseverance team. Good luck
Ask
with
him.
them. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Indeed. And you know what? I think that's a great way to end it. One of our future destinations as a species and our robotic explorers making it possible. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, and see you later, nerds.
We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be nominal.
EDT pressure looks good. Toggling up. Roger roll with Atlantic.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango down to nominal.
Flight downside SCE off. Say again, SCE off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.